going on, guys? So today I'm going to talk about using Excel. This talk will be for those who are extremely new to Excel, going over the basics, everything from how to write in a cell, what a cell is, all the way up to what we use it for daily strength and conditioning, writing athlete programs, cards, functions, all of it. Today we're going to start off with writing in a cell. So each one of these little boxes is called a cell. This one right now is highlighted that I clicked on. Really simply, you click on the cell you want to write in and you can start writing. So if I wanted to write soccer program, boom, there it is. It's now in B2 cell. Another easy way to do it is going up to this bar up here, the function bar, and writing the same thing. So soccer, enter, and it's now in that same cell. On the same note, you can erase it. So very simply, click on it once, hit the delete button, and all the information is gone. If you wanted to edit this, like, oh, actually, I want this to be soccer, like women's soccer, you could write, you just go up to the function bar again, type women's soccer, and there it is. That being said, you can also double click it in the actual document and it will accomplish the same thing. So if I need to put a space in there, add a space, enter, and there it is. So that's how you write in a cell. As you can see, the words overlap into the neighboring cell. So the next thing we're going to talk about is fitting the cells to your text. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little closer. So for this example, right, it would be helpful if the B cell was a little bit longer. So if I go between the B and C columns up here until I have this double-sided arrow, and I double click right in between, the cell will automatically adjust to the largest text. So for example, if this was women's soccer, program, right? This is now the longest text. So if I double click, it now adjusts to the largest thing there. You may not always want it to be this large. So for example, if I go right between here again and I drag it smaller, I can manually decide how big I want that cell to be. So for example, if I just want it this big and this one is overlapping, another way to fit text to a cell is you click on the cell you want to adjust, and there we have this wrap text option up here. So you click it once, and suddenly the words inside that cell will try to conform to the size. Once again, we can do the same thing with our rows over here. So I go between 3 and 4. I get that double-sided arrow, and then my rows will do the same thing. So we did it with the columns up here. You can do the same thing down with the rows. Most strength and conditioning coaches, starting off, the very first thing you're going to want to do is create a exercise menu, right? Just a list of every single exercise that you have. So how this is going to work in Excel, I'll just zoom out a little bit so we have a little bit of room. I'm going to go up to this insert option up here on my kind of options bar. I'm going to click on table, and then this screen should, create table screen should kind of pop up. So easiest thing to do, in my opinion, is just click and drag, right? So if I want my table to extend from A to, let's say, H column and down to 10 on the rows, right? I just click all the way out and I drag all the way down. I'm holding down the mouse the entire time. Then when I let go, it's going to automatically kind of fill in that space. I hit enter once, boom, and then there's my table. So like I said, so this might be your ground-based explosives, lower body push, lower body pull, upper body push horizontal, upper body push vertical, you know, same thing. Close. Then maybe core. And again, like if this is too small, right? It's very crammed. Going back to what we kind of discussed earlier, I'm going to do it all at once this time. I'm going to highlight every single one of my columns that I want to adjust. I double click in between using that double-sided arrow, and then all of those columns A through H have adjusted accordingly based on the size. Likely we'll have to adjust them again once we start inputting text. So for example, if I said hang clean here, lower body push is a squat, lower body pull, deadlift, bench, overhead press, I don't know, row, chin up, front plank, right? Again, all these have kind of different text lengths, so we can quickly adjust our columns going that way. Very similar with the rows, right? If I highlight all the rows I want to manipulate, if I drag one of them out, right, they'll all drag out to that same size. I realize I spelled chin up wrong. And so that's how you make your table. And you can give your table a name over here. So this is table 1. Maybe I call it X menu. And that's my table name. So every time oh, sorry, I can't do it that. There we go. Every time I want to reference this table, right, that's the table name. So it's easy. So one thing I want to touch on before we move on to borders is merging cells. So for example, if I'm writing this card, I'm kind of taking a step back here. If I want to merge cells, right, easiest thing to do is highlight all the cells you want to do. So click and drag. So if I want this men's lacrosse header to go across the entire top here, right, I'm going to click and drag and then click this merge and center option. So click it once, boom, all those cells now become one, merge and center. The cell number will stay whatever the first cell is that you started with. So for example, if I click here and I look over here to the left side of my screen, it says B2. Even though this is merging B to L and all the way down 2, 3, and 4, the cell number for this is always B2. That will become useful to know kind of later on as we go. All right, so now we're going to be moving on to borders. So when you go to write your athlete's card, you're going to want to be kind of following a template. Some people are lucky enough to start off with one that someone has kind of handed down to them. Other people might be starting from scratch. So this is for those starting from scratch. My number one piece of advice is always sketch your card out first. Have a rough outline of what you want your card to look like, including where you're going to put your exercises, where you're going to line up the sets and reps, how many weeks it is. That way you kind of have a rough idea of all the space that you want to work with a little bit. So we have our card here. So I have hang clean up here. I'm going to do weights, percentages, sets and reps, kind of use shading to differentiate the space between the two. So for ease sake, right, let's say that I'm doing 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 3 hang clean for my first block. And then down here, I want to pair their hang clean with a hip flexor stretch. Flexor stretch. So again, writing that cell. Then with their hip flexor stretch can be their active rest. They're going to do 20 seconds each side. So when you go to print this out, right, all these little lines here won't be there. All these thick borders that I put in will be there. So if I did want to differentiate my 2 exercises with a little bit of separation, right, I can click and drag over the space. And then this option up here, this little grid with a line on it, right, if you click that drop down, you have a bunch of different border options. So for this sake, I'm going to go bottom border, boom. So now there is a line separating the first exercise in that block from the second exercise in that block. You know, maybe solid line isn't what you really want to work with, right? If we kind of follow the same process, if we go down to more options, you can do line style as well. I think it's easier to do more options. It will pull up this screen and you can kind of select what you want. If you want a dotted line, a dashed line. I like to use this dotted one. And then once again, right, I'm gonna be putting it at the top of the cells that I highlighted. Okay, and then when I click away, I now have that same line, but it's now dotted. And same idea for squat. If I decide, okay, we're gonna kind of pair two exercises in between, they're gonna be doing dumbbell row, you know, 3 sets of 5, we'll keep it the same. Again, I highlight that space. I'm gonna use a dotted line so I know I'm going straight to more borders. I select the line I wanna use, click where I want it, okay, click away, and now that is all set up. You know, same idea can be applied to anywhere you go. So if I'm writing this program, I'm gonna pair chin-ups with, what would be a good exercise today? Maybe a split squat, and then I'm gonna throw in some core. So why don't we do shoulder taps, right? I wanna separate all these. If I highlight this whole thing, I can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So to say, click my dotted line, I want it above, I want it below, click away, and now it's easily there. Borders are another great way to kind of clean some things up. So like I said, the only lines we'll be seeing when this card gets printed are these thick lines. These tiny little lines that separate the cells won't appear when it's printed. So for example, if I want all these separated from one another, right, I can click on my day 1, drop in that bottom border, and then same idea, right? I can highlight this, you know, go all borders, and then all my borders will appear. You'll notice that these borders are thinner than the original borders that were used to do this card. So again, like you can play around with thickness of lines. So if I wanted to fix this back, right, just another option, go to a slightly thicker line, put it on the side, put it on the bottom, and it should kind of match up back to the way it was. If you just want to really simply put in a thick bottom border, right, like say I want it down here, that is an option. There is a thick bottom border option, click it once, boom, and there it is. So yeah, you can play around, kind of put the lines where you want them, more lines, less lines, use shading. There's a bunch of different options when using borders. Another great thing about Excel is inserting and deleting rows and columns. So a good example of this, so I have all this extra space down here. Say maybe like this is just my workout, I don't need all this extra space. I can very, very simply highlight, you know, go over to the number rows. If I control click or right click that space, I'll get some options. If I hit delete, they're gone. You know, everything, if you click one of these row options or one of these column options, every single thing in that row and column will disappear. So it's a really easy tool to use. I would say be very, very careful. So Excel, I'll take a quick little field trip, goes on forever, right? You can scroll all the way down, scroll all the way up, all the way out to the side, and all the way back in. So when you click on one of these rows and columns, you highlight every single cell that exists. You know, most of us work in a very small space, right? In this whole book, I'm just working in that very small space. So it's not really a problem. But if you do have stuff on the other side, when you delete information, you want to make sure that you're not deleting everything if that's not your goal. Inserting, right? So we just did a deleting example, inserting. If I wanted to insert a row along the side here, right? So if I did want to label these A1, A2, A3, A4, whatever, if I, same idea, control click or right click, I'll get that same menu and I can press insert. One good thing to note is that it will always insert to the left of where you want that column. So if you want it between the exercise and this first column that says weight, right, you would insert over D rather than C, because it always inserts to the left. So once again, like this could be A1, this could be A2, B1, B2, so on. Oops. And again, like when you do this kind of stuff, you always need to be readjusting and stuff. That's why I say sketch it out first. Like know how many columns you want, know how many rows you want to deal with, because when it comes to adding, you may have to reformat this, right? So if I wanted to reformat all of this, I would have to drag this out, you know, remerge these cells, take down some of these lines. You know, it's not the worst thing in the world. It does take a little while, you know, but we prevail. Again, you can click two rows at a time or two cells at a time, kind of drop those borders in. You know, if I wanted to extend this row out, you know, click around. It's not the end of the world if you ever need to add something that you didn't originally account for, but it does definitely add a little bit of time. And as you're new to Excel, it just takes a little longer than those people who are a little more experienced with it. But as you see, I just kind of went through those steps fairly quickly, and it was pretty simple. Again, if I wanted to kind of clean this up, you know, there it is. So the next thing we're going to talk about is inserting and deleting individual cells. A little trickier. So like I said, when the Excel books are kind of infinitely long, one thing to note is if I wanted to get rid of this to only be 2 exercises, hopefully this works. If I click on this cell, right, click it, right, get all my menus, I delete this cell, it's going to ask me which way do I want to shift the neighboring cells. So if I shift up, right, my shoulder tabs is going to move up. If I shift left, all this stuff to the right of it is going to then shift left. Entire column, entire row, we kind of talked about. You know, the easy thing would be to just erase the entire row. I'm just going to show you kind of what it would look like if you were to shift left or right. So if I hit OK, boom, shoulder taps move straight up. It does mess up your formatting. I mean, that's an easy fix. You just kind of copy, paste, you know, change that border back. So again, these things don't totally mess everything up, but they do affect kind of the formatting that you have to deal with. But that would be one way of doing it. You know, there might be a better example down the line, but when you do erase a specific cell, like if I were to delete this one and then say shift left, all the information from the right side moves left. So you notice I now kind of pulled this line over, the sets and reps column got pulled over. You can do it. It makes things a little more challenging depending on what you're looking for. Great, so the next thing we're gonna talk about is once you have your card all figured out, right? So if I've kind of been playing around with Excel and this is more or less my final product and I wanna start filling it in with player information, we're gonna talk about making a drop-down menu next. So if this is my card, it's for women's lacrosse, fall phase 3, right? Lacrosse teams can have many players on them, right? So you want them all to use the same card, right? But you don't wanna write their name in, write in their maxes, print the card, write the new name in, write in the maxes, print the card, right? That's exhausting, it takes forever. So drop-down menus are super helpful to use. So for example, this is my card. I decided this is where I want the athletes' names to be. So the first thing you want to do is add a tab. So down here at the bottom, you see I have multiple tabs open. If I hit this this plus, right, I get a new workbook or a new sheet. So I've already done it over here. So I have my maxes tab, and here's my table with my athletes' weights. So for example, you can have your athletes going down the first column hang clean, squat, bench, deadlift, whatever you test them in, whatever information you want to fill in, that's what you're going to do. So take the time to make a table, fill it in with your athlete's information. Kind of a pro tip here is whatever order you have in your testing card or your maxes sheet is what you want to show on your lifting card. So for example, I have clean, squat, bench, deadlift. If I go back to my card, clean, squat, bench, deadlift. It's going to be helpful down the line when we go to add in maxes. But for now, right, just make sure you have your athletes' names filled in. Go back to your original card, and you're going to click on the cell that you want their names to appear in. So for me, that's my A1 cell. Again, clicked it once. I'm going to go up here to the top to data. Data validation. I'm going to change this allow to list. And then you kind of have to be careful. So everything I click from now on is going to be recorded. So if I go over to the side here, this little grid looking icon, once I click this, it's going to pull exactly the information that I click on. So kind of know your steps here. Step number 1, click the grid. Step number 2, click your maxes tab. Step number 3, highlight all the athletes' names you want to include. So for me, that's athlete 1 through 7. Once they're highlighted, hit enter. Pulls you back to this page, hit enter, okay. And then you're good. So now my A1 cell has this little drop-down arrow. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you. And when I click it, I have athlete 1. When I click it, I have athlete 4, right? So I can jump between whatever athletes that I want to appear. And again, you can always reformat this to look a little nicer if you want. Oops, I did something here. There we go. So if I center it, right, it's a little more appealing. So that's your drop-down menu. The next thing we're going to talk about is adding maxes. So, right, I have all my different athletes with all their different maxes. If I go back to my maxes card, they all have different things going on. These are made up numbers, don't read into them. But, right, the card that I print for athlete 1 is obviously going to be very different than the card that I print for athlete 5, and so on. So we want to make sure that their maxes are accurate as well. So if I go back to my card, our next function that we're gonna talk about is VLOOKUP function. So for any function that you're gonna write, you're gonna start it with equals. So in this case, equals VLOOKUP, open parentheses. So once you open that parentheses, right, the computer is gonna tell you exactly what it wants. So in this case, the table array, the column index number, the range of lookup, and then it's gonna close it off. So in simple terms, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the cell that we want the athlete's name to appear in. Boom, comma, our maxes tab and our highlighted table. So I highlight everything from athlete 1, in my case, all the way down to 185. So that's A2 all the way down and across to E8. So that's everything that's wanted to include. You can highlight less. I think highlighting it all at once makes it easier to copy and paste later on. So comma 2, right? Because we're filling in our hang clean max. So in this case, it's column number 2, even though it's labeled B, a little confusing. Comma false, F-A-L-S-E. So right now, my function reads equal VLOOKUP, open parentheses, my name cell. So for me, that was A1, comma, the entire table and all its information, name, hang clean, squat, bench, deadlift, all of it, highlight it all, comma, 2, comma, false. Enter, and there it is. Athlete 1 has their hang clean max. And if I change it now to athlete 3, it has theirs. Athlete 6, right? It changes with every athlete that I put in. So moving forward, the next thing you can do is redo that process for all your maxes that you want to have on here. I think the easiest thing to do is just copy and paste. So if I were to click on this cell, the two things that I want to kind of make sure is that I put a $ in front of this A and in front of this 1. And that's going to lock in this name cell because that's not changing. As I drag it across, that's not changing, right? My computer labeled my maxes table 2, so that's not changing. If yours has a bunch of numbers and letters kind of attached, like say it's going from B2 all the way down to E, I don't know, 20, you want to put a $ in front of the B, in front of the 2, and all in front of the E, and in front of the 20, to make sure that those numbers aren't changing, right? Because as we drag it across, Excel's going to want to drag it across, but we don't want to do that. We want to keep all that data the same. So right now my function reads $A, $1, table 2, because my Excel book has kind of labeled that table 2. Again, if yours has numbers and letters, make sure you put $ in front of them, comma 2, because before we were referencing the second column, which was our hang clean. So that's going to be changing, and then false, right? So if I hit enter, if I were to copy and paste this into squat, it's now locked in. If I copy and paste it into bench, it's locked in. If I copy and paste it into deadlift, it's locked in. But like I said, that column number is the only thing that's changing. So because this is set up exactly like it is in my Maxes tab, if I change this 2 to a 3, if I change this 2 to a 4, if I change this 2 to a 5, right, it now has all the same properties as before, but for the given exercise. So in this case, if I were to change, if I were to change to athlete 6, right, all their numbers change. If I were to change athlete 2, all the numbers change. So just to double check, right, we're looking for 235, 230, 130, 405 for athlete 2. I go to athlete 2, 235, 230, 130, 405, right? So it fits. And that's just like a good way to confirm that you did it correctly. So the next function we're going to look at is called an MROUND function. In this case, MROUND, we're going to be using to fill in our weights, right? So we have our names, we have our maxes, and now we want to fill in the card. So again, if you kind of just lift off percentages and athletes fill it in, great, awesome. I'm going to teach you a way that you can fill in their weights for them off percentage training. So in this case, right, if we're doing 3 sets of 3 at hang clean, first set's going to be at 50%, second set is at 40, 60, excuse me, and last set is at 70%, for example, just for ease. We would want those numbers to appear here. So we use MROUND because it will round our number to the nearest 5 in our cases. Most gyms are in increments of 5. If your gym is in something else, like kilos, for example, you can round to a different number. So again, we want that to appear here. So I click on my cell, and like I said, it's going to be MROUND. So equals MROUND, open parentheses, and we're going to do 2 this time, actually. So this is a hang clean, right? So I'm going to be referencing my hang clean max. You'll notice I have this little shadow box kind of moving around. If I click on my hang clean max, right? Click, that's my H2 cell, times the percent that I want to reference. So in this case, it's covered a little bit, so I can't click on it, but I can see that it's D6. So if I write D6, close parentheses, comma, the number that we want to round to, in this case it's 5, close parentheses. So right now my function reads equals MROUND, open parentheses, my hang clean max cell, in this case it's H2, times, using the asterisk, so shift 8, our percentage cell, so I'm referencing the one right next to it, so it's D6, which is where the 50% is, close, comma, 5, close. Hit enter, and that is automatically filled in. So that's 50%. If I were to change this, right, oh, I last minute want to change it to 55%, the number will automatically change as well. 50%. So, you know, it's a pretty easy number to kind of see. 50% of 120 is 60, so it's confirmed that it works. This MROUND function is going to go along with how to drag out formulas, how to drag out formatting. So similar to what we did with our functions earlier, we want to lock in that H2 cell, right? Because if I were to drag, if I were to drag this down, right, I go to the corner, I see a black plus sign, I move it down, right? It's moving in other places in the workbook as well. So we want to lock some things in. So that H2 is not going anywhere. We are always referencing hang clean for these hang clean reps. So I locked that in, so it's $H $2. And now when I drag it down, oops, got rid of that border. But now when I drag it down, it automatically fills in, right? So as we drag down, it now, this one is referencing D7, this one is referencing D8, so it moves down as you go. So those are the percentages. I'm going to do it really quickly with squat so you can see it again. So just kind of see how fast you can move through this when you're writing your programs. So again, this is D9. So I'm just going to type it in right now because I can't click on it. And once again, that squat number isn't going anywhere. So when I go to drag it down now, boom, it's there. One of the last things I'll touch on this topic is zeros. So for example, if I go back to my athlete maxes, right? Not every single athlete on every single team is going to have tested or be able to test in every single exercise. So for example, if let's say, just a common example that I come across is athlete 1 didn't hang clean test. They have, you know, an upper body issue or back problems. So for whatever reason, athlete 1 didn't test. They didn't have a max for that one, right? So that cell will be left blank. I would say the best thing to do with blank areas is to write like did not test or not applicable, something along those lines. There's something in that column that the computer can reference. So when I go back to my card and I go to athlete 1, right, when they go to print out this card, I'm going to have all these value problems, right? The computer's like, oh, there's no information there. It's not a number. I don't know what to do. You don't really want that on their card. It doesn't look great. Even if you did change this to something that was more their speed or something that they're able to do, right? We still have all this junk kind of written in there. So the last thing I'm going to kind of touch on is if-error functions. So if-error is exactly as it sounds. If there's an error, this is what I want you to fill it in with. So in this case, I go back up to my function, and I'm just going to add if-error. So right in front of my MROUND, right, goes equal. That's where I'm going to add it if-error, open parentheses. So if the MROUND function has an error, so if-error, my original function, so all the way over here on the end, I'm going to write double quotes. So double quotes is saying what's in between those quotes is what I want you to put into that space. So in this case, I just do double quotes side by side with nothing written, no space, no nothing, shows that I want it to be blank. I close it up, hit enter, and once again, there it is, it's blank. So I can drag that down just as I did before, always that bottom border. And now when I go to print out the card, there's not like value, error, function, like craziness. You know, it makes it look a little bit cleaner, and it makes the athlete, in my opinion, feel like there's nothing wrong, right? We're working with them to still be the best they can be. Our computer can just deal with it. But same goes for if you have, you know, a piece of data missing, always fill it in so that the computer can reference something. If it is in fact blank, like if you just took out DNT and there was a 0 there, right, it's still going to put in zeros because there's no information there. So that's why I say when you go to a card or to a Max's card, you always want to put something there, like did not test, NA, something so that it stays blank. So one of the last things I'm going to talk about is cheats that you can use if you're using functions repeatedly so that you don't have to constantly change and rewrite, So I went ahead and kind of moved some things around here on this template. So for example, if I had a team that is squatting at these percentages for 5 reps, and honestly, they're going to do the same thing for bench. I think copy and paste is a great tool to use. So in this case, I'm going to copy, Control C, or right click copy, right? Paste, Control V, right click paste. Sometimes your boards might get messed up. You might have to fix them. It's the exact same everything. The only thing is changing is the number we're referencing. So in this case, right, if I were to click in here, double click in here, it's referencing my squat number up here, right? That's an easy fix. I'm going to change an I to a J, right? Now it's referencing bench. Boom, same thing. I drag it down, fill out that formatting, just clean this up a little bit, right? And now those are my bench numbers, right? This formula is now pulling from my bench, as you can see. And then as I go to change athletes, all the numbers will change as well. And that goes to show kind of the same for any exercise. So if I'm want to use these same sets and reps and percentages for incline bench, I copy, I paste it over here, right? Incline bench, we can say is roughly like 70% of your bench max. At least that's what I use, 70, 75. So I add another parentheses here just so things don't get all weird, times 0.7, right? So I'm taking my bench max that I had before. I'm now multiplying it by the adjustment needed for incline, enter, right? And now my numbers are all going to be adjusted as well. So again, I don't know. Formatting always a little bit of trouble, but I mean, borders are easy to deal with. Functions can be a little bit harder. So now, again, I took an old formula over here, I plugged it in over here, made some adjustments, and it's an easy way to kind of get a card written. Our very last topic that we're going to talk about is printing. Probably, the bane of many of our existence. It's one of the hardest things with Excel, in my opinion. So let's say that this is your final card that you've worked on. How do you get it to all fit to one page? So the very first thing you're going to want to do is get familiar with this page layout option, and more specifically, your print area. For example, if I have this card as it is written here, pretty narrow card, right? It's going to be more likely to be printed off in a portrait style versus a landscape style. So I'm going to highlight everything that I want printed. So in this case, it's the entire card. I'm going to go set print area because that's what it's going to be printing, nothing else. My orientation is put to portrait. For letters and stuff, margins are nice, but for training cards, they're pretty useless in my opinion. I customized my borders to be 0, 0, 0, 0, right? If you go to this custom margins option, just change all of these to zeros. You don't need them. You don't want them. You want as much space as possible. And then make sure that somewhere in this file, you center your card. So center horizontally, center vertically. That way it's filling up from the inside out versus kind of like off to the left or down or whatever. Make sure that those are also checked off. When you do go to your print option, so when you go to print it off, it always gives you a little bit of a preview off to the side here. Make sure you're scaled to fit one page, one page wide by one page tall. If it's not checked off, that's usually when you get this kind of double page, in this case, 4 pages that I was kind of talking about earlier, right? It's going to be ugly, it's going to be gross. Make sure it's scaled to fit. It will give you the most accurate version of what your card is going to look like. If you do find that it's too far up or too far to the left or whatever, you might need to play around with the height and width of your cells. So maybe if it's too scrunched up top, maybe you open up these rows a little bit longer. If it's too crammed to the middle, it might look better to kind of open these guys up a little bit, make it fill out that page a little bit more. So when you go to print, it really does fit that page a lot better. Another place you can look is down here. So in your bottom right-hand corner, you have these three options. If you click the rightmost one, it's going to bring you into this. So these blue borders can be adjusted. If you drag it all the way up, in this case, this is what's going to appear on the page. Nothing more, nothing less. So if I go to print now, it's just that area. This is very similar to your set print area. You know, if I drag it down, inspirational quote, you know, that's what's going to appear on one page. Like I said, it's very similar to your print area. If I just want to print, maybe day one is done, day two isn't done, but the athlete walks in the door and says, "Coach, I want to work out," print them off a card. This one would do better, you know, landscape. You know, really fill out that page a little bit more. You know, you can play around with it until you find exactly what it is you want to print off.